For years, Israel and Iran waged a covert war, a shadow conflict fought on multiple fronts, hidden from public view. This clandestine struggle involved espionage, technological warfare, and proxy battles across the Middle East. Cyber attacks became a common weapon, with both nations targeting critical infrastructure, government systems, and financial institutions. These digital assaults aimed to disrupt, destabilize, and extract valuable intelligence. Assassinations of key scientists, military figures, and intelligence operatives were attributed to both sides, further fueling the animosity. These targeted killings sought to eliminate threats and weaken the adversary's capabilities, and sabotage in the shadows became a regular occurrence, with attacks on industrial facilities, energy infrastructure, and military installations. These covert operations aimed to cripple the enemy's economy and military strength. But on June 13, 2025, that shadow war burst into the open, shattering the fragile peace and escalating the conflict to a new level of intensity. The world watched with bated breath as the long simmering tensions finally boiled over. Israel struck deep inside Iran, launching a series of coordinated airstrikes against strategic targets. The operation was swift, precise, and devastating, catching the Iranian military off guard, targeting nuclear sites, in an attempt to dismantle Iran's nuclear program and prevent the development of nuclear weapons. The strikes aimed to cripple Iran's ability to produce fissile material. Missile factories, essential for Iran's defense capabilities and regional power projection, were also targeted. The destruction of these facilities aimed to weaken Iran's ability to strike back, and top military officials, responsible for Iran's military strategy and operations, were targeted in the attacks. The goal was to decapitate the Iranian military leadership and disrupt their command structure. Iran's response was immediate, a furious and coordinated retaliation against Israel. The Iranian military mobilized its forces, preparing for a full-scale conflict. Waves of drones and missiles rained down on Israel, overwhelming its air defenses and causing widespread damage. The skies above Israel were filled with explosions and the sounds of war, transforming a cold rivalry into a hot war, a full-blown military conflict with devastating consequences for both nations. The region was plunged into chaos and uncertainty. The world watched in alarm as the conflict escalated, fearing a wider regional conflagration. World leaders scrambled to find a diplomatic solution to prevent further bloodshed, threatening to draw in global powers, as the conflict risked destabilizing the entire Middle East and beyond. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis. The U.S., caught in the middle of renewed nuclear talks with Tehran, found its diplomatic efforts jeopardized by the escalating violence. The delicate negotiations were on the verge of collapse. Suddenly faced a crisis involving its closest ally, forcing Washington to reassess its strategy in the region. The White House Situation Room became the center of crisis management. President Trump's administration quickly shifted from diplomacy to open support for Israel, reaffirming its commitment to the security of its ally. The president addressed the nation, vowing to stand by Israel, sending military assets to the region, including aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and troops, to deter further aggression and protect American interests. The U.S. military presence in the Middle East was significantly increased. This pivot risked direct confrontation with Iran, as the U.S. military buildup raised tensions and increased the likelihood of a direct clash. The situation was volatile and unpredictable. As the U.S. edged closer to the heart of the conflict, the risk of a wider war loomed large. The Middle East stood on the precipice of a major catastrophe. Every move now carried the weight of potential war, with the fate of the region hanging in the balance. The world held its breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution to the crisis. The U.S. responded with a show of force, rapidly deploying fighter jets and missile defenses to Israel. 2 advanced THAAD batteries and missile-intercepting warships arrived, intercepting Iranian missiles in real time. Over 30 aerial refueling tankers were sent to support extended air operations, ensuring Israel's endurance in the fight. The U.S. also moved to protect its own 40,000 troops across the region were put on high alert. Non-essential embassy staff and military families were evacuated from high-risk areas. These moves underscored the seriousness of the threat and the deep military integration between the U.S. and Israel. American forces now stood directly in harm's way. U.S. troops stationed across the Middle East find themselves in an increasingly precarious situation. Their presence, intended to maintain stability and deter aggression, has instead become a focal point for escalating tensions. They now face grave danger, a threat that looms larger with each passing day. The region is a powder keg and our soldiers are standing right next to it. This danger stems especially from Iranian-backed militias operating within Iraq and Syria. These groups have a clear objective: to undermine U.S. influence and destabilize the region. These groups, armed with advanced drones and increasingly sophisticated missile technology, pose a significant and evolving threat. Their capabilities are not to be underestimated. They could potentially overwhelm even the best-laid defenses, pushing our military infrastructure to its limits. The risk of a successful attack is a constant concern. This puts American lives directly at risk, and the consequences of inaction or miscalculation could be devastating. The safety of our personnel is paramount. Any U.S. casualties resulting from these attacks would almost certainly trigger a direct and forceful military response. The pressure to retaliate would be immense. This risks escalating the conflict into a wider war, a scenario that could engulf the entire region and draw in other global powers. The stakes are incredibly high. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes, is another major flashpoint, a potential trigger for a global crisis. Any disruption to the flow of oil through this strategic waterway could send global oil prices soaring dramatically, impacting economies worldwide. This could trigger widespread economic turmoil, destabilizing markets and impacting the lives of ordinary citizens across the globe. Recent Israeli strikes have already resulted in the deaths of hundreds of Iranian civilians, further inflaming tensions and complicating the already delicate situation. This is fueling anger and resentment within Iran, making diplomatic solutions even more challenging to achieve. The path to de-escalation is becoming increasingly narrow. Mass panic in Tehran, fueled by fears of further escalation, has led to chaotic evacuations as people desperately try to flee the city, seeking safety elsewhere. This has deepened the already dire humanitarian crisis, creating a massive influx of displaced people in need of food, shelter, and medical assistance. The U.S. is now under immense pressure from allies and international organizations to de-escalate the situation and prevent further bloodshed. However, every option on the table carries enormous risk, and the potential for unintended consequences is ever present. The conflict threatens not just military stability in the region, but the very fabric of international relations. It also poses a grave threat to global economic and humanitarian security, potentially impacting the lives of millions around the world. The stakes have never been higher, and the world watches with bated breath as the situation unfolds. At home, the Trump administration's unwavering support for Israel has become a significant point of contention, igniting passionate debates across the political spectrum. This staunch backing, while celebrated by some, has also drawn considerable criticism and sparked concerns about its potential ramifications for American foreign policy in the region. Is far from universally popular. Public opinion polls consistently reveal a deeply fractured electorate, with stark differences in views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the appropriate level of U.S. involvement. Deep divisions have emerged within the Republican Party itself, a phenomenon once considered unthinkable. While traditionally a bastion of unwavering support for Israel, cracks have begun to appear as different factions grapple with the long-term implications of the administration's approach. And Trump's own base, which is not monolithic in its foreign policy views, many of whom oppose another Middle East war, wary of further entanglement in a region perceived as a quagmire. This sentiment resonates strongly with a segment of the population that prioritizes domestic concerns and questions the rationale for expending resources on foreign conflicts. Non-interventionist voices like Senator Rand Paul, a prominent figure within the Republican Party, urge restraint, advocating for a more cautious and measured approach to the region, warning against endless foreign entanglements that could drain American resources and lead to unintended consequences. They argue that diplomacy and dialogue should be prioritized over military intervention. Grassroots MAGA activists echo this anti-war sentiment, further complicating the political landscape, creating political headaches for Trump as he navigates these conflicting pressures. As he balances pro-Israel rhetoric with his America First promises, a delicate balancing act that requires careful maneuvering, Trump's messaging has been erratic, often contradictory and difficult to decipher, swinging between threats and calls for diplomacy, a pattern that has become a hallmark of his foreign policy, leaving allies who are crucial for any successful international strategy and adversaries guessing about America's true intentions and long-term goals. His social media outbursts, often impulsive and unfiltered, including demands for unconditional surrender issued via Twitter, have only fueled uncertainty, creating a climate of instability and apprehension on the global stage. This political discord complicates U.S. strategy, undermining its credibility and effectiveness, and increases the risk of miscalculation, potentially leading to dangerous and irreversible decisions. America's internal divisions are now on full display, weakening its position on the world stage. As the crisis deepens, highlighting the urgent need for a more coherent and unified approach. The Israel-Iran conflict is shaking the global economy, with oil and aviation hit hardest. Iran's oil exports have collapsed and Israeli refineries have been targeted, tightening global energy supplies. The closure of Iranian and Iraqi airspace has forced airlines to reroute flights, causing delays and higher costs. Major carriers have suspended flights to the region, citing extreme danger. The threat of a prolonged Strait of Hormuz blockade has markets on edge, with energy prices spiking and recession fears rising. The world is reminded how quickly Middle East instability can trigger global crises. Economic shockwaves are spreading far beyond the battlefield. Beneath the headlines and the geopolitical strategies, civilians are suffering the most devastating consequences. In Tehran, Israeli warnings and Trump's social media posts sparked a mass exodus of terrified citizens, with families fleeing in utter panic. Roads jammed solid, gas stations overwhelmed beyond capacity, and palpable fear gripped the city as devastating airstrikes loomed. Hundreds of civilians, including vulnerable children, have tragically been killed in the relentless attacks, according to official Iranian reports. The already dire humanitarian crisis is rapidly deepening, with essential services severely disrupted and deep psychological trauma relentlessly mounting. Displacement and profound loss are now daily, heartbreaking realities for thousands. The true and devastating cost of war is ultimately being paid by the innocent. The U.S. stands at a crossroads. Every decision could either de-escalate the crisis or ignite a wider war. Diplomatic pressure might force a ceasefire, but continued escalation could draw America into direct conflict with Iran. A wider war would cripple oil supplies, destabilize the region, and trigger a global recession. Domestic political divisions would deepen, just as unity is most needed. The world is watching Washington, hoping for leadership that avoids catastrophe. The next moves by the U.S., Iran, and Israel will shape the future of the Middle East and the world. America must wield its power with caution, balancing deterrence with diplomacy. The stakes could not be higher. The path chosen now will define the world's security for years to come.